My name is Ramakant Agnihotri. I retired as a professor of linguistics from the University of Delhi a few years ago. For the last about 25 to 30 years, I have been working with a variety of NGOs such as Eklavya, Vidya-mitra Society, Digantar and many others, training teachers in the science of language and working with children. And I still continue doing that across the country. At the moment, I am associated with various universities, including the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and I am associated with Vidya-mitra Society very actively. The course that I am going to talk about in this particular series is called Applied Linguistics. This particular course is divided into 30 different modules, or maybe the 32. We will get to them one by one. And each module will tell you about what applied linguistics is all about. But to begin with, we need to understand what linguistics is all about and what language is all about. See, I am aware that you will learn about this in various other modules and in various other courses. But I think as an introduction, I should like to clarify what we mean by linguistics and what we mean by language. Most people think a linguist is a person who knows many languages. Now, that indeed is the dictionary meaning of the word linguist, and to that extent it is correct. But it is not the case that all linguists in the world know many languages. Some know 2, some know 3, some may know only 1 in full sense of the term. Linguistics, as we use it, really means the science of language. And when I say science of language, linguistics means that a science that studies the structure, acquisition and change. So the acronym that I use for this is called SAC, S-A-C, SAC, structure, acquisition and change. We focus on the structure of words, of sentences, and how these words are put together into sentences, and how sounds are produced and how sounds are put together, and there are rules behind putting these things together into a discourse. What I am doing at the moment is having a discourse with you, which consists of, at the lowest level, of sounds, then words, then sentences, and then there is a way of putting sentences together. They can't be put together in any random way. So that is what linguistics is all about. It studies the structure, acquisition and change. And we will continue using this sort of basic meaning of linguistics in the various modules, and you should keep that in mind. Now, when I talk about language, then for the past since we can say the mid-1950s, and then certainly the beginning of the 1960s, with the appearance of the major linguist of modern age, Noam Chomsky, our perspective on language has changed quite significantly. What it means is that we are all born with an innate language faculty, irrespective of whether we are visually impaired or we are hearing impaired or orthopedically impaired. All human beings are gifted with this innate language faculty, and we are programmed to acquire language. Just as we are programmed to see or programmed to walk or programmed to have our hands, similarly, we think it is possible that we are programmed to learn languages. And that faculty that the human brain is supposed to have is the faculty of universal grammar, which all human beings have. And this universal grammar is not to be confused with the grammar of a particular language. It is a very abstract blueprint that underlies human language. Every language in particular has its own grammar, which will obey the universal grammar blueprint, and it will have, every speaker of that language will have competence in that language, and that competence would be grammatical competence, and because of that grammatical competence, he or she will perform in her language, and that is performance. And language and linguistics. So, linguistics is the science of this kind of language, which at the abstract level where the grammarian is working has to be seen at the level of competence. But it is on the other hand associated with society and with the human mind. So, we study the social aspects of language and also the psychological aspects of language. As we will go on, we will understand this phenomena. And in this course, we will be talking about natural languages as opposed to artificial languages. Human beings can get together and construct languages like Esperanto, or computer languages you may be familiar with like COBOL, BASIC, or Fortran, or C, C++, etc. But natural languages, people don't sit down to create a natural language. Languages, in a sense, happen to people, and then they grow, they change, and they develop all the time. The first module of applied linguistics is concerned with telling you about what language is. We should first understand what language is all about, and then talk about applied linguistics in different modules. Applied linguistics, as we will see in later modules, particularly in module 30, I think, applied linguistics is connected with a whole range of different fields. That's why it's called applied. That means where the knowledge of linguistics is applied to different domains of human activity. The primary area with which linguistics is associated is that of language teaching. And in the past century or so, enormous amount of work has been done on the application of the science of language to language teaching. There are several other areas like computational linguistics, which examines the interface between language and computer science. So you think of artificial intelligence, you think of psychologists, you think of mathematicians, and you think of logicians. They all come together and work with linguistics and computer science to see what kind of interface can be there between man and machine. There is an application in, for example, forensic linguistics. In forensic linguistics, we use linguistics to identify or to undertake criminal investigations, and it's of great help how to identify criminals through the analysis of their voice and various other phenomena. In the field of education, so there is a whole field called educational linguistics. So you cannot even conceptualize education without language. Language is at the heart of education. There is no subject that can be taught without the use of language. So there is an application of the science of language to the field, to the whole domain of education. You will find that more and more degrees and diplomas in the field of education, like masters in education or bachelors in education, they would generally include at least one or two courses on language, mind and society, and the teaching of languages, acquisition of language, structure of language. So there is a whole field of educational linguistics. Then there are areas like biolinguistics, which examines how languages might have evolved with the human body, and how it is possible that language is located in the human brain. So that's another area. Similarly, you can think of a whole area of translation and the application translating from one language to another language. If you have some knowledge of linguistics, then it goes a long way to help you to translate better. So similarly, there are n number of areas in which linguistics is being increasingly applied, and we will talk more about it later. But the first module is concerned with the nature of language, what language is all about. The first thing I think that you need to understand is that language, that means natural language, language that is used by human beings in their day-to-day intercourse, in their day-to-day communication, consists of signs. Consider, for example, the word table. We think that the word table has something to do with the object table. That's not the case. Once table becomes a part of language, then it gets into the morphology of language. That means into the systematic nature of language. It becomes a part of its word forming system. It becomes a part of its sentence forming system. So from table, you can have tables, or which is as a noun. Now probably you don't know, or you have never thought about it, that table can also be used as a verb. So you can say, she tabled a resolution in the parliament. So that tabled is not a noun, but a verb. So language is essentially arbitrary in nature, and that, if you keep that in mind, you will be able to understand the following modules in a much better way. We then need to understand what are the most defining features of language. One way of understanding it is that how is human communication different from animal systems of communication, because animals also communicate with each other. I mean, dogs have a certain system of communication, birds have a certain communication system. The honeybees, for example, do a certain kind of dance, and they can identify where the flowers are and where the honey is to be found, nectar is to be found, and then they can convert it to honey. So that dance is a system of communication. But these systems among the bees, among the dogs, among the birds are highly limited in character. They can produce only finite number of messages, limited number of messages. Whereas human language, all human languages are capable of producing infinite number of messages, infinite number of sentences, new sentences all the time. You understand sentences that you have never heard before, and you produce sentences that you have never heard before. If you read a newspaper, you cannot find a single sentence that is repeated twice. Every sentence is a new sentence, and every day. So just imagine it. Every time you speak a new sentence. In the past few minutes, I have not repeated a single sentence, for example. So language is capable, human language, as opposed to animal system of communication, is capable of this infinite capacity. Another important feature of human language is that it is rule governed, and that is why it can produce an infinite number of messages. It is rule governed at a multiplicity of levels. That is called the duality of patterning. You will find it in the first module, that it is first organized at the level of words, so that sounds are turned into words by a set of rules, which we will see soon in the second module. And words are then arranged into sentences not at random. They are arranged into sentences according to certain rules. So this organization of language at different levels in terms of sets of rules produces that what has been called duality of patterning. And that is why we can produce an infinite number of sentences. Another important feature of human language is what has been called displacement. All these are called design features of human language, and they were first systematically put across to us by a famous linguist, Charles Hockett. Displacement means that we are able to talk about our past. We are able to talk about our future. Now, dogs can indicate the smell, that's all. But dogs can't talk about few years back, can't give messages, or birds can't relate stories that they have heard, they never probably understand, to the best of our knowledge, that we can create our past, we can narrate about our past, we can also sort of think and talk about our future. So language has that property of displacement. So it is not bound to the present context, it is not bound to the immediate context. There are several other features which separate the human language from animal systems of communication. Another important feature that distinguishes human system of communication or natural human languages from animal systems of communication is that language gives us the power to reflect, to think. We can analyze our own experiences and then talk about them to other people. I can think about what I said yesterday, reflect on it, and then say something different. In fact, language gives you the power to lie. You can say something which is not there. You can say something which is not true. Language makes that possible. 3 or 4 features distinguish a human system of communication, or what we call natural languages, from other systems of communication, be it any. So one of them is infiniteness, as I said, that a finite system of rules helps us to produce infinite number of sentences, infinite number of messages. The second important feature is what I talked about, duality of patterning, that language is organized, rule governed at multiple levels. So languages are hierarchically organized. For example, if you want to make a negative of a sentence, you have to know the positive. It's not that you consciously think of the positive, because the knowledge of language is unconscious. It's not the kind of knowledge that you have about physics or the kind of knowledge you have about history. It's a kind of knowledge that you have that is unconscious. You don't have the knowledge how to see things. You have the knowledge how to walk. You have the knowledge how to see and put your images together. But you cannot talk about that knowledge. Similarly, the knowledge that you have about language, you cannot talk about it, but it's very much there. The knowledge about language is there. So if you want to make a negative of a sentence, then you have to know the positive. Take an example, John is eating an apple. Now, if you want to make a negative of that sentence, you have to say John is not eating an apple. That not has to go near the auxiliary. It cannot go with apple, it cannot go with an, it cannot go with John, it has to go with the auxiliary. It cannot go anywhere else. Even if there were a sentence like John goes to college, then you have to create something that will invite the auxiliary. So John goes to college, John doesn't go to college. John does not go to college because not demands that there must be an auxiliary. Otherwise, you can't make a negative. So that is why we say languages are hierarchically organized. This is a very important feature. Let's take another example. How do we make questions? It might be very simple. You can say, John is eating an apple. So John and is. We make a question, is John eating an apple? Good. So you can say John is 1 and is 2. So you can say 1, 2 becomes 2, 1. Looks very simple. But suppose I say the man who is standing at the roof is eating an apple which is red. Now there are 3 is. John who is standing on the roof, number 1, is eating an apple, number 3, is red, number 3, number 2 and number 3. Which is will go to the front? Not the first one. it is only the second one. John, who is standing on the roof, is eating an apple which is red. So it is eating an apple, that is will go to the front. That means is number 2. So you would say, is John who is eating an apple which is red. That's all that you can say. So you have got to know the rule of the simple sentence to be able to make a question, because it is the auxiliary of the main clause that will be fronted. So that's why we say that languages are hierarchically organized. And that is what makes human language so different from any other system of communication. There are a few other things that we have talked about in the first module. We have said that the job of the linguist, as opposed to the traditional grammarians, for example, is to describe languages, not to prescribe languages. Linguists don't tell you this is how you should speak. You should say, I shall go and he will go. We don't tell you that. We don't say that you should say Shanti and no, never say Santi. For us, if there is a speech community which says Santi, is as good as a speech community which says Shanti. So there is nothing wrong with that. We will describe the rules of that language and not prescribe the rules of a particular language. So languages are essentially, the job of the linguist is to describe languages and not to tell people what to say, not to prescribe. Take, for example, something that in a certain variety of English is often said, I ain't eat nothing, which means I didn't eat anything. So I didn't eat nothing is not wrong. Okay, it is absolutely correct in that particular variety of language, which in some other variety of English means I didn't eat anything. That also takes me to another point, which is often raised in linguistics, and that is the difference between language and dialect. And I think this I should clarify here, that for linguists, there is a difference in a very different way as opposed to what people generally believe. For us, there is no systematic rule-governed difference. I mean, dialects are as rule-governed as languages are. In fact, the famous proverb, the famous quotation from a great linguist is that a language is only a dialect with an army and a navy. Okay? So that should make it clear to you that there is no difference between language and a dialect. People would say, oh, but languages have script. But to create a script, it will take you a few minutes. You know, you sit together and make a script for a language, so dialect will become a language? No. People also tell you that languages have literature, but dialects don't have literature. That's again false, because so-called dialects, let's say, look at languages like Bhojpuri, Maithili, Avadhi, and Hindi. Today, Hindi is called the language, the official language of this country. Mind you, it's not the national language of India. It is only the official language of India. And all the other languages like Avadhi, Bhojpuri, Maithili, Maghai, Bundeli are called the dialects of India. Nothing could be more unfortunate, because in that process they get stigmatized. In fact, all these languages should be called the mothers of Hindi rather than the daughters of or the dialects of Hindi. So, so-called languages have their literature, so-called dialects. I mean, Ramcharitmanas was written in Avadhi, so not written in Hindi, right? So, there is no difference at any level. Another important parameter along which the language and dialect is generally distinguished is that people would say that the languages are widely spoken, but dialects are locally spoken. Nothing could be further from the truth. The fact of the matter is what you call language, let's say standard Hindi or standard British English, is spoken in no more than 10 miles an area. So-called standard Hindi may be spoken in some streets of Meerut and some streets of Allahabad, Otherwise, people speak Bhojpuri, or people speak Avdi, people speak Maithili, people speak those things which we call dialects. They are languages. So there is no fundamental difference between language and dialect. Okay, so that point I think you should keep in mind. We have also talked in this module very briefly about the whole notion of speech community, because we are establishing the basic apparatus of what we will be talking about later. Generally, it's very difficult to define speech community, and all the definitions end up being circular. That a speech community is one which speaks a particular language, and a community which speaks a particular language is a speech community. So this, this tends to be very, very circular. But the fact of the matter is that a group of people living in a certain territory, so it's a territorial kind of definition, very difficult in modern times to even sort of demarcate the territory, because let's say Punjabi speakers may be in Punjab, in Delhi, in rest of the country, in Canada, in England, in Australia. So how do you limit even the territory? But generally speaking, a smaller group of people living in a certain geographical area, but more importantly, they share a set of norms. They share a set of social, cultural, and linguistic norms. How to talk to your elders, how to behave in certain situations, how to conduct certain rituals, all this is shared. So that sharing constitutes the foundation of a speech community. So that's another point that we have talked about. We have also talked, you will find a small section on language and identity, because language is constitutive of us. Language defines us, and it can define us in multiple ways. It does not mean that one language, one identity. No. First of all, you can have multiple identities. You may be of a certain color, certain caste, certain region, and you can have various kinds of identities. And in terms of language, a person like me will identify with a sort of language, almost unknown language called Mandayali, which is spoken in Mandi, which is in Himachal Pradesh. Well, that's where I grew up. And I also come from Punjab, and I know Punjabi. So I have an identity with Punjabi, I have an identity with Mandayali, right? I have a definite identity with Hindi. Similarly, I have an identity with English, right? So there is multiplicity of languages that, with which I identify. So languages constitute my identity. Also, all the knowledge that I get is through languages. So languages bring us knowledge, and if I want to create new knowledge, then I construct it through language. If I want to relate to people, I do it through language. So languages are constitutive of us. They in fact construct us and our social group, right? So that's the question of language and identity, which is very important. Another thing that is important and has been discussed in the first module is the issue of language change. I have talked about that language, the science of language, which is linguistics, is concerned with SAC. So structure, acquisition, and change. There has been a lot of work done in the past few years, in the past sort of 50, 60 years, on structure and acquisition, but not so much work on change. But increasingly, more and more people are now again getting interested in change, which was earlier done in historical linguistics in the 18th and 19th centuries. People were primarily concerned with language change. So that's another issue that we need to understand, that although the universal grammar and the language faculty that underlies all human languages, not one specific language, may be constant. It may always be the same, or may change very, very insignificantly over a period of hundreds of years. But languages in performance, languages as they actually function in social groups, in a speech community, actually change all the time. Languages change as I'm talking to you. I'm probably changing my language, my style of talking. So languages are changing all the time, we don't notice it. That is how, let us say, it is through these processes that we had 21 forms of a word like Ram or Balak in Sanskrit. So you had Rama, Ramau, Rama, Ramam, Ramau, Raman, Ramen, and you had forms like Ramasya and Ramaya and Ramabhyam and so on. All these forms were there. Now what do you have? You have only one. You have only Ram. That's all. And then you say Ram ka, Ram ki, Ram ke liye, Ram ko. That's how you perform those functions. But the language form, the form of the language has undergone significant change. So an applied linguist has to keep this in mind, that languages are structured, that languages are acquired in a certain way, and that languages change all the time. So this is another important. Finally, I think I'll focus on one more point, and that is, which is slightly indicated in the first module, that this universal grammar that all of us are equipped with, this language faculty, this gives you the capacity not only to acquire one language, but a multiplicity of language. So all of you will be familiar with children of 4 or 5 years who can speak and understand 2 or 3 languages. It is very common that you have a family where the mother is a Bengali and the father is a Punjabi, and they are growing up, the children are growing up in Kerala, all of them. So child talks to the mother in Bangla, talks to the father in Punjabi, talks to her friends in Malayalam. Very common. Such phenomena is very common, not only in India, but all parts of the world. So this relationship of language faculty with multilinguality, and to be able to understand that language should be defined as multilinguality, that means the capacity to acquire several languages and in that kind of dynamic flow, and negotiate different kinds of social encounters with people should be kept in mind. And throughout this course, in all the modules, we will keep this in mind, that language should be understood as multilinguality. That is the human capacity. Thank you very much.